welcome to this first of two final Inside Government programs for the spring 2023 season here at Key Community College. Broadcast on Spectrum, Verizon Fios, the Auburn Regional Media Access, better known as ARMA, as well as the college's radio station 89.1. I'm your host, Guy Cosentino. The City of Auburn has started its budget process. Last Thursday, our guest tonight told the City Council that he expects that 2023-2024 fiscal year to be, quote, one of the tough years we have, end quote, when it comes to the budget front. But we do have in the studio, as we do for our last shows every spring, the city manager of the City of Auburn, Jeff Dygert, to talk about the budget process and where he is and why this will be a tough year, and what taxpayers can expect to see in the proposed budget that sees the general fund increase by about 4%, or that comes out to about $1.7 million, or just under a $45.5 million budget in the coming year. There are also gaps in sewer and water funds. He has not made a recommendation, I don't think, but we'll hear about this, on a specific tax rate if they're going to increase taxes or the levy as of yet, but we'll talk to him about that and a number of other items that the City of Auburn does need to adopt a budget by mid to late June for July 1st start date. Complicating matters, maybe not for our guest, but for the city in general, is that there are 3 city council seats up. A majority of the council is up, with 6 people fighting for those 3 seats. Welcome back.
Good to be here.
So we'll talk about Mike Brown. We'll talk about the state of the city. But most important, you made a budget presentation the other night, and I want to talk about that. First of all, how's everything at City Hall? How staff doing right now?
We're doing well. Everything's still busy. Lots of projects going on, and right now, the matter at hand is the annual budget.
So where are you in the process overall?
In the process, at least as far as what the public can see, last Thursday we gave the initial budget presentation, the overall budget presentation, and about half of our department heads gave brief, high-level overviews of their departmental budgets.
Will they get into micro presentations at some point, or do you just try to do?
That has not happened in quite some time. I know that you're familiar with.
Yes, the bad old days.
Past, there were times when we would go line by line per individual budget. That's extremely cumbersome. I don't know whether or not that ends up being very fruitful in the end. I've been
It is if you want to make a name for yourself and put lots of little cuts and bruises on a budget.
Unfortunately, I think sometimes when that happens, there's not enough consideration put into what the long-term effects of some of those cuts would be. My theory on a lot of things is to try to just hold steady, right? When things get rough, hold steady, don't make any major adjustments, because oftentimes the readjustment afterwards is painful.
More painful.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question, because I was trying to do the count last night. This is your 6th budget presentation, am I correct?
I think so. That
okay.
Sounds right.
So think back 6 years, pre-COVID. What's different from then to now for you,
I
not
think
process-wise?
No, it's a really good point. It's a point that I try to bring up to folks, whether it's our elected officials, our staff, or people from the public that talk about things. And in the past, for so many years, we're able to go back and look at history and identify trends and see how things are going. We had a pretty good idea early on in COVID, but the longer that COVID went on, so you've got roughly a 3-year block there, we knew that nothing, and it sounds dramatic, sounds kind of theatrical almost, that nothing was ever going to be the same. But that's the reality of it. And I think we see that in the private sector, public sector, in our daily lives. So much has changed. It's not likely to go back to the way it was, and it's very hard. Right now, I think today and moving forward, we're developing the baseline for what we can trend off of in the future.
For future.
But the last 3 years, so much has changed. It's very difficult to pick
both
up
on the in and out.
Absolutely.
Federal and state revenues coming in, expenses going up high, all over the place.
Just general things in general, our regular daily lives, right? For you and I and everybody watching, just to go to the grocery store or to have work done on their home or their vehicle repaired. Anything you do is skewed now, and I don't know that anything has gotten less expensive.
And it's become harder to hire employees.
extremely difficult, especially certain types of jobs. Yeah.
So let's talk about one. I know I said we had lots of viewer questions, but one was about police, and that is that you had given an exam. You're down, as I understand it, you've hired some police officers. They're in the academy. You have 2 more you can hire.
Right.
And you're waiting for some things on that. But your list is exhausted again.
We're pretty close, yeah, and that's a common topic throughout the country, not just Central New York, not New York State. A lot of these things that we're dealing with are the same discussions that are happening from.
So does that mean you do a new test? I mean, it used to be you can only do 1 test a year, and I think now you can do 2 a year.
There are more opportunities. We're in communication with state civil service. A lot of municipalities are trying to see if there's any way we can get state civil service to allow for some sort of a rolling, continual recruitment for jobs like
So you have some job openings in APD, correct?
Yeah.
How about at Auburn Fire Department?
They just hired to fill a position there.
So
they're fully staffed.
So they're fully staffed. So prior to getting to Thursday, and you and Ms. Jacobs made your presentation, did City Council give you some parameters?
Not yet. That's typically what happens right about this time. So we make this initial presentation. It's like, okay, here we go. Here's where we're at. And I've seen different approaches throughout the years. I've seen folks put a preliminary budget in front of council with anticipating that there's going to be cuts. I don't operate like that. I don't operate like that no matter what we do, any sort of negotiation. I try to come in with a realistic proposal.
But I think Ms. Jacobs said that you still have a gap.
We definitely still have a gap that we have to work with.
She said about $3 million out of the 45.5. So let's go into we'll come back to the process issue.
Sure.
So what's caused that gap?
Revenues. So there's a change in revenue. So again, you mentioned that what our expenditures are fairly static. There's been some growth, but when you look at the growth in the overall economy and the cost of goods, the cost of doing business, 4%'s not too awful bad. The majority of that is on the labor side.
So your wages, again, taking from the Citizen story that was, and I think on Saturday, you had a 4.8% increase in wages. You're going roughly about a little over $1 million. You're going from 22 million to 23.1. And personnel is always, but that's still only about half your budget.
Right.
That's still your largest chunk of cost, correct?
So when we look at all sorts of other things, the cost of fuel, utilities, chemicals, for instance, for the pool at
Blacktop
Park, and all of those things, everything's going up.
So on the expense side for employees, are you adding any employees to your budget?
No.
Okay.
No.
So, but you are reducing some line items from before. So let's take, for example, vehicles and maintenance on that area. You're almost cutting $400,000 out of your budget from the current budget.
That's not much, though.
It's not
when
much.
We think about the cost of the types of vehicles
but it's still a 67% reduction.
It is. It looks like a lot as a percentage. In money, it's like you say, around $400,000. But what that $400,000 will purchase for us,
so it's not
a dump truck is $200,000.
So it's not maintenance, though. So it's not maintenance. Is it maintenance?
No.
Because I guess my question would be, the way I looked at that number, I said, well, is that deferred maintenance? And then if you start putting it off, it only gets more expensive.
Well,
it's the pay me now, pay me later.
Exactly. So, again, for a limited time, we can let off the gas a little bit, coast, try to get by with what we've got, try to have things stabilize a little bit. But yeah, if we take that approach for too long, as you know, it's just like building maintenance or anything else, right? You can only avoid the drippy roof for just so long before it's not a single drip and it's a major roof replacement, So we have the ability to do that. We've invested heavily over the last few years in our facilities, right? Things that hadn't been addressed in years.
So a lot of one-time purchases.
A lot of capital improvements to our buildings that really need it. And we still have work to do there. So
let's go back to Thursday night. Just I want to finish up on this just process-wise. I know for our next guest, the other Jeff, who follows you, Jeff Barzola and Lisa Green, who used to be at City Hall.
Mm-hmm.
State budget isn't a bigger impact for them,
Right.
revenue. Is the lack of a state budget, and we're only, I'm surprised we're 11 days late now, and I know it's on other issues, which is its own issue. Is this late state budget having an impact on what you're figuring?
Yes. Yes. So there are some items that we're not sure exactly where we'll land. Things like some of the budget allocations from New York State that pass through to us for street maintenance and things like that. There are other things in there that have been discussed. Our proposal.
But you don't think you'll ever get an increase on CHIPS fund for our? When was the last time the state of New York?
At some point, something's got to happen, right?
But it's been since the 1980s.
Yeah,
they haven't.
And a little bit of it. This is, these are certainly discussion points that have to occur with our state representatives. Much like the school district, for years went without increases. Running a municipality, running a school district, they're major costly endeavors. And when you look at what's it been, 10 years, 12 years that the 2% tax cap's been in effect, that has been really abided by in Auburn for that time. When you're limited by that 2% tax cap, it makes it tough at times to keep up with everything else that's increasing.
So where are you in the process now? What are the next steps? Because you do have to adopt a budget by July 1st, correct?
Yep. So we have a budget calendar, as you're well aware of, so that kind of sets out the timeline. In a perfect world, if there are a lot of tough conversations, debate, ideas thrown out there that we have to rework through, it could extend that out. I think right now we're set to have council vote on a finalized budget, I think on June 1st.
Okay, so roughly, and that gives you about a 3-week cushion. You've got to either the 18th, I can never remember the date, but the 18th or the 21st.
Yeah, we've got to.
Or that drives the comptroller and the treasurer's department over the edge.
Right.
Okay.
Because that's all got to come together with the final assessment and things like that.
So is this why you said, with all this stuff we've talked about, expenses and the new world of post-COVID, is this why it's a tough year? And do you expect more tough years, or is this going to be an anomaly?
I'm not 100% sure. I'd like to think that it's a one-time anomaly. It may last for a couple of years. Things tend to work in a cycle. You've been around enough that there tends to be a cycle. We'll keep an eye on it. Our department heads do a phenomenal job staying within their budget. And in my time in this current position, I think we've always come in under our projected budget. That gets tougher to do every year, though, as you trim things down. We'll keep an eye on revenues, things like sales tax.
So where are you on sales tax?
We're up. We continue to trend upward, but again, it's one of those things. After a while, you'd think that that's going to plateau at some point.
Is it because, and I've asked this in other venues, is it in part because a lot of people who are still working from home are making upgrades to their homes? So sales tax over
it's hard to tell. I think again,
home improvements.
Your experience, we knew for the longest time, like trying to figure out what the tax on vehicle fuel was. It was like we never knew. It was just like, because the state wouldn't break it down. The state has started to break some things down a little bit more so we can get a better idea. And it certainly was helpful when online purchases started to generate local sales tax, right? Because you could argue that it gave places like Amazon unfair market advantage and things like that, but it did help.
So I shouldn't ask this, but so if the state does go to this idea of 5 cents a box, I think I've read, for home delivery boxes, does that mean the city will get money, or
I
do you
don't
think
know.
that's just all going to go?
Honestly, I haven't looked into that.
Because I do know that on my street, that is going to be very lucrative for somebody.
Right.
Well, because the recycling cost. I ask that only because you got to recycle all that. It's going to go to your landfill. It's going to be recycled.
Right.
So it might be the state gets the 5 cents.
And recycling is another big topic for us. Years ago, that used to be a small revenue stream from that, and now it costs us money to recycle and to try to do the right thing.
All those projections from the 90s, all out the window.
Yeah, well, that worked for a while, and then the environment changed.
So in the past, city council would get a budget book that was the equivalent of most likely the Webster's Dictionary when we were kids. Did they just get this 20-page presentation from you, or do they have a budget book now from you?
They've basically got the presentation right at the moment, and as we get into things,
So they'll get
we'll
things
drill
on
down.
there.
Yep.
So the big elephant in the room for you, obviously the school district are going to get here some questions in a little bit about their 1.99.
Yep.
Where are you on the? You've got a $3 million gap.
Yep.
There's usually one of three ways to do that.
Right.
You either cut or raise revenues, or you print money.
Right.
That the last one I believe is eliminated unless there's a printing press on the bottom of 24 South Street. So where are you on this process?
Again, we have to look at revenues. That's something that we've spent some time on, but we haven't spent a lot of time on it. Again, having a better understanding of what we're going to receive from New York State, diving a little bit deeper into sales tax and projections for sales tax, and then we have our fee schedule, which there are items in our fee schedule that haven't been.
So you're assessing
adjusted
all of
before.
those.
Yeah, we're looking at everything, just like you would at your home.
So leave sewer and water out for a second. On a fee schedule, give me an example.
A fee for a permit, a fee for an event, a fee, they're just a number.
So if somebody wants to put a mattress out on their front lawn,
Right.
I don't know if it's 10 or 20 bucks, but you might have to increase that.
Yeah, things
Because
things
the
like that.
costs go up for that.
Right.
So I do want to ask about sewer and water. So you are, no pun intended, you are underwater, or you have a gap.
Yep.
In sewer and water. So in sewer, 308,000. In water, I think it's 359. What's caused those gaps, first of all?
Well, I mean, the obvious, right? Our expenses compared to the revenues are different. But some of that stuff, if you look at it, and if we go back to presentations that have been out there in the past, when we set the rate, at times we set the rate knowing that if we set the rate and leave the rate for a period of time, there are times when we know there will be a budget gap, and times where we know in the out years that it will reverse. So they're looked at as they're not one-time issues necessarily. They are actually planned, and over the course of a rate being in place for X number of years, it will even out at the end.
So for the 308, 359, do you see a likelihood of a rate increase in those funds this year?
Not necessarily, although we are talking about, we're constantly having discussions about.
Well, that's where
rates,
I want to go.
Right. So
I want to talk about
not
upgrades.
in the forefront right now.
Okay.
We have discussed water rates. There's been discussions about trying to equalize water rates, much like we did with sewer rates a few years ago. The water rates for the towns surrounding the city they vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction due to some old contracts that are out there, and there's some desire, I think, with some of the towns to
bring them more
unify those. Yeah.
So the reason I asked this question about sewer and water, because one of nothing is in a vacuum. So part of what you have had your staff, Seth Jensen, for example, has been making a number of presentations about upgrades to a sewer and water system. It really hasn't been upgraded in large part since the 1990s.
Right.
So my question is, that's a multi-million-dollar upgrade. Do you have a dollar amount roughly?
It's roughly $85 million.
So the last one,
main project.
yeah. So the last time in $1990, it was about $56 million. And so back then you had low interest loans and you had no interest loans. How do you finance this 89?
Same thing, 85.
Okay, 85.
85. And we have some other projects going on as well. So we have grant funding for a portion of that, and off the top of my head, I can't tell you what that is, what that number is. And there is also 0% financing for a portion of that. So for a significant portion of that, we can borrow the money.
But at some point, you do have to have ratepayers pay
right.
the non-interest.
And what has made this an achievable, attainable goal for this rebuild of the wastewater treatment plant is the fact that money that you mentioned before, that early 19 to mid 1990s work, that major investment the city made back then, the debt is falling off. So our annual payments for that debt are coming off.
Because those are 20 and 30-year loans, and that's roughly what this is at this stage. The other piece of here that you kind of, in what I read in the newspaper, not having watched the whole presentation, American Rescue Plan money. There is still some Washington money.
Yep.
Can any of that money be used to defray the current budget? It
Yes.
sounded like from Ms. Jacobson that could help close that $3
There
million.
is. We'd like to avoid that if we can, right? So that gives us an opportunity. It gives us a little safety net and things like that. So we're going to look at everything, but that is also a possibility for us.
So what is the tax cap rate for Auburn this year?
Currently, again, that will be somewhat fluid as until they vote on the budget.
Okay.
Practically every day up until then, there's things that change, and that changes that. So right now, the public knows that there's a 2% tax cap, but there's a formula.
Right, which
And
means
sometimes the 2% tax cap is less than 2%, sometimes it's
higher.
more. For us, right now, based on what we know in putting that information into the formula, we're about 1.9%.
So if you went, how much would 1.9%
That
generate?
would net us in the area of $283,000.
Three police cars, maybe? Half a block of blacktop?
Again, police cars have gone up in cost about $10,000, about 30 to 40% in just the last
So
year.
that's what I'm saying. So you're not talking about 1.9% may give you a half a block of blacktop.
Right.
Or a couple of cars.
Yeah.
Okay. I've just process-wise, last one. Your goal, is it to do no tax increase? I know that in a perfect world you don't want to do a tax increase. Do you think that people should be prepared? I ask that only because the school district, as we'll hear in a few minutes, is going up 1.99. Is there presenting? I think the county went up in December 1%.
Right.
Can taxpayers take it?
Right. Well, and that's the thing, right? So we have to balance the budget against the services provided. I think we've had very good feedback about the services we've provided over the last few years. We've done a lot of things. We've invested in our parks and playgrounds. We've maintained them, I think, better than we ever have before. We've invested in our buildings so that we can expect hopefully another 50 years out of Casey Park, for instance, right? So those are important things that need to happen. I think it's important also when we talk about the budget and potential tax increases, when we see, as you mentioned, 1.9%, that is not like 1.9% added to the tax rate. So at this point, it's 10. Say it's just a flat 10% or $10. It's the way it's calculated. It's essentially a percentage of a percentage. So the impact of that 1.9% in this case, if that were to happen, and again, the preliminary discussions, the impact on an average household was, I think, around $24 a year, $25.76 a year.
So you will not give a number out until there's a state budget approved, and I'm assuming we're not going to get to an August late budget.
I would hope
many
right.
years ago.
Right.
But would you expect sometime in May the council?
I would hope that maybe next week. I would hope.
Whether there's a state budget or not?
Oh, no. Oh, I thought you meant the state budget. I'm sorry.
No. I'm not even optimistic.
I'm hoping that we can stick to our schedule. We'll continue to do our work, and then as the state budget solidifies and we know more about what's going on, we'll punch those numbers in and see what happens.
So just as you're figuring out that COVID has changed the world, there is a lot of conversation in City Hall that Micron is going to at least change the world locally.
Mm-hmm.
How is City Hall preparing for Micron?
So again, we've been extremely busy doing the things we normally do and the projects we currently have. With the Micron announcement, we don't want to be behind the curve on this. So we are investing a lot of staff time. We're trying to make sure that we are present and accounted for and accountable at meetings throughout Central New York, and make sure that we're putting faces with the city of Auburn, even if they're not pretty faces. I'm talking about me, not staff.
Well, but let me ask you,
to make sure that we're represented and that we know what's going on, we hear what's going on.
So in Cayuga County, there are, I believe, 4 committees.
Correct. So we've gotten together with Cayuga County and a number of people from the private sector, public sector, and broken those discussions up into 4 main groups, and that is site selection for commercial endeavors, residential development, workforce development, and energy.
And I know Cuyahoga County's doing this, so I was with some people. Oswego County's doing this.
Mm-hmm.
I was with somebody the other day. Mohawk Valley's doing this.
Yep.
Mattis is doing it. Is there a cohesive, separating, and I'm not criticizing Center State or Onondaga County, but it sounds like all the surrounding counties all have 8 different groups of 4 committees each.
Yeah,
Are
so
you all meeting together at all?
There are some meetings that happen collectively with that group, and there's been discussions about doing that more frequently. And the issue that you have, just like anything else, right? We want to win, right?
Right.
But we also have to be collaborative enough that we don't, through competition with each other, drive somebody totally out of the region.
But last week, or was it last week? Last week or the week before, we were with Bill Fulton, Cuyahoga grad,
Yep.
we should say, ACC grad. He talked about setting the infrastructure, though, not for. He wasn't talking about Micron. He was giving a Volkswagen example in Pennsylvania.
He was talking about Micron.
But he was talking about setting the stage for community growth and community preparedness, whoever the company is.
Right. And that's what we've been looking at. And we've done that since the beginning. We were doing that before the Micron announcement, right? So what we started to see just a little while ago was an uptick in interest of commercial properties, manufacturing properties, residential properties. We're starting to see this. And I hate the term organic, but for whatever reason, right, that started to happen. Then there's this Micron announcement. My view on things is, we're going to keep moving forward. The Micron energy and enthusiasm is good because it gets more people involved. But we want to also make sure that our local businesses, our local manufacturers, if they have an opportunity to benefit, are getting the attention they need. And we want to make sure that all facets of this. So one of the discussions that we frequently have is, right now there's a very big focus on technical education and workforce development. The conversations that's not happening as much, but it is happening, that I think we need to be focusing on is we've got a Route 81 project, we've got a construction project and multiples that'll have to happen for Micron and all of their other things. Route 31 will have to be changed in that area, I'm assuming. Right. So we need to be thinking about the people that are swinging hammers and wrenches and doing construction work and skilled trades in that regard, as well as the tech jobs that'll come a few years down the road. So there's a lot to it, and we're trying to be as supportive as we can of all of that stuff. We're trying to.
So you're optimistic on that particular.
We're reaching out more than I'm ever aware of that we have as a city to manufacturers, businesses, things like that.
So 4 viewer questions real quick. We got about a minute and a half, 2 minutes, so we don't have to get into long answers, but a couple of questions. One parent sent an email. There was a lockdown drill at Herman Avenue School, and I'm not expecting you to know where every lockdown was, but the Auburn police the day after the Nashville shooting. Should that have been rethought?
I don't know, and I wouldn't offer you an actual opinion on that until I know more about it, and I wasn't aware of it. I don't know who it was arranged for. Right.
Okay.
And for the sake of argument, maybe it's not a bad idea when it's fresh in people's minds either. So.
Are you having trouble keeping crossing guards? This was another parent question. I'm assuming they're parent questions, or they're seeing crosswalks.
It's not necessarily a lucrative position. It's a little bit odd. The hours are odd, so it's typically retired folks, and our weather necessarily isn't always conducive to that either. So.
Last subject. A former city councilor candidate has a loan out with the city. I guess his business is since closed on Genesee Street. What's the issue for the city?
So we have a couple of issues similar to that one. That one certainly is larger in the dollar amount.
How much is it?
And I believe the amount owed, based on the revenue we received from liquidating the business, is in the neighborhood of $150,000.
And where's the city in your collection?
So,
Whether it's this or any other
like
process.
anything else, it was a loan, and there's a loan agreement that stipulates how things would work out after that. So we're working through that process. I'll say I'm optimistic that we'll be able to work something out and recoup those funds. But it's a process.
It's a process. Thank you for coming in, as you always do at the end of, I think you do always the end of the fall and the end of
It feels like I was just here.
April. You were just here.
Okay.
But our guest has been City Manager Jeff Dygert. I want to thank him for coming in to update us on the city budget and where he is on that. We'll be back in just a moment with Jeff Parazola, the Superintendent of the Auburn Large School District, and Lisa Green, their Business Manager, to talk about the flip side of what the Auburn Large School District is doing on a budget that has to be adopted by the public on I believe May 16th is when they will go before voters. And then in a few minutes after that, we'll have a very abbreviated Beyond the Front Page with Janie Hutchinson and Bonnie Blair, talk about the Auburn Education Foundation's Hall of Distinction for 2023. So we hope you will join us for that. We're going to take a break then for a couple of weeks. We'll be back on May 9th with the Auburn Large School District Forum, as we annually do. Jeremy Boyer will be asking the questions as the executive editor of The Citizen, and I'll be moderating. But if you have ideas for future guests for this spring, or this coming fall, or questions we should be asking of people during the fall, you can send them to cozguytho@aol.com. For now, I'm Guy Cosentino from Community College. Stick around for the Auburn Large School District in just a moment, and then the Hall of Distinction.